The idea of wetting a powder brush seems counterintuitive. After all, powder and water are typically seen as opposites in makeup application. Yet, this technique has gained traction for its ability to transform the texture and finish of powder products. Understanding the science behind this method, and when to use it, can significantly enhance your makeup results. This exploration delves into the distinct outcomes of using a powder brush both wet and dry, providing a clear guide on how to master each technique for a flawless, professional finish. First, let's establish the baseline. The dry powder brush. This is the traditional and most common method for applying products like setting powder, bronzer, and blush. The primary function of a dry brush is to pick up and distribute a fine, even layer of powder. The natural bristles or synthetic fibers are designed to catch loose particles and then release them gently onto the skin. When you swirl a dry brush into a pressed or loose powder, the individual fibers separate and hold the product. As you sweep or press the brush onto your face, the powder is transferred, creating a sheer, diffused effect. This method is ideal for setting liquid foundation without disturbing the base, reducing shine in the T-zone, and adding a subtle wash of color to the cheeks. The key advantage of a dry application is control over sheerness. It allows for building up product gradually, preventing a heavy or cakey appearance. For a natural, skin-like finish, a dry, fluffy brush is unparalleled. It respects the texture of the skin, mattifying where needed while letting the skin's natural dimensions show through. Now, let's introduce water into the equation. Using a powder brush wet involves dampening the bristles before picking up product. This can be done with water, a hydrating mist, or a setting spray. When the bristles are damp, they behave very differently. Instead of just picking up loose particles, the moisture on the brush slightly emulsifies the surface of the powder. This process creates a cream-like consistency directly on the brush. When this mixture is applied to the skin, the effect is dramatically different from a dry application. The pigment becomes more concentrated, and the finish is more vibrant and luminous. A wet brush essentially transforms a powder into a cream, delivering a bolder color payoff and a more seamless, melted-in skin look. This technique is particularly effective for highlighting, as it intensifies the shimmer particles for a wet look glow. It also works well with blushes and eyeshadows, amplifying their pigment for a more impactful statement. Furthermore, a damp application can increase the longevity of the makeup, as the product adheres more securely to the skin once the moisture evaporates. The choice between a wet or dry brush depends entirely on the desired outcome and the specific product being used. For setting powders, a dry brush is almost always the correct choice. Its purpose is to absorb excess oil and lock foundation in place with a light veil of product. Using a wet brush with setting powder would create a pasty texture, defeating its purpose and potentially causing the foundation underneath to break apart. The goal is mattification and diffusion, which are best achieved with dry bristles. Similarly, when applying bronzer for a soft, sun-kissed warmth, a large, fluffy dry brush provides the necessary diffusion to avoid harsh lines or patches. The aim is to mimic a natural tan, which requires a sheer, buildable application. Conversely, a wet brush shines when intensity and luminosity are the goals. For powder highlighters, dampening a small, targeted brush can elevate the glow from a subtle sheen to a high-impact, reflective finish. The water binds with the mica and pearlescent particles, making them adhere to the skin in a concentrated layer that catches the light beautifully. This technique is perfect for evening looks, or for anyone who loves a pronounced, dewy highlight. For blushes, a wet application can be used to create a watercolor effect, where the color melts into the cheeks for a natural flush that appears to come from within. It's important to use a light hand, as the pigment will be much stronger. Stippling the product on with a damp brush and then blending the edges can provide a long-lasting, vibrant pop of color that looks incredibly natural. The type of brush also plays a crucial role. Natural hair brushes are highly absorbent and may become too saturated with water, potentially altering their shape and performance over time. Synthetic brushes, on the other hand, are less porous and tend to work better with wet applications. They don't soak up as much water, allowing for a more controlled application of the dampened product. For a dry application, both natural and synthetic brushes work well, with natural bristles often excelling at picking up and blending powder seamlessly. For a wet application, a dense synthetic brush will offer the most control and pigment payoff. A less dense, or fluffier, synthetic brush can be used for a more diffused wet application. The technique itself requires precision. To wet your brush, it's best to use a facial mist or setting spray rather than running it under a tap. A fine mist provides just enough moisture without oversaturating the bristles. Lightly spritz the brush from a distance, or spray the back of your hand and dip the brush into the liquid. Then, gently swirl the damp brush into your powder product. You may notice the powder's surface darkens where it comes into contact with the moisture. This is normal and is often referred to as hard. To avoid this, it's wise to designate one side of your powder for wet use, or to gently scrape off the top layer if it becomes sealed. When applying, pat or stipple the product onto the skin first to deposit the color, then use gentle sweeping motions to blend the edges. This ensures an even application without streaks. Understanding the interaction between powder formulations and water is also key. Finely milled, high-pigment powders generally perform best with a wet application. Their smooth texture allows them to emulsify easily without becoming chunky or patchy. Talc-free formulas, which often use cornstarch or silica as a base, can also work well, offering a silky finish. However, some matte powders, especially those with a high clay content, may not respond favorably to being wet and could become difficult to blend. It is always a good practice to test the technique on a small area of your hand before applying it to your face. This allows you to see how the powder transforms and to gauge the intensity of the pigment. In summary, the decision to use a powder brush wet or dry is not a matter of right or wrong, but a strategic choice based on the desired aesthetic. Use a dry brush for setting, diffusing, and building sheer layers of color. This classic method provides a soft focus, natural matte finish, and is the go-to for setting powders and subtle bronzing. Opt for a wet brush when you want to amplify pigment, increase luminosity, and achieve a long-wearing skin-like finish. This technique excels with highlighters, blushes, and even eyeshadows, transforming them into more vibrant, cream-like products. By mastering both methods and understanding which products and tools are best suited for each, you can unlock the full potential of your powder makeup, customizing your finish for any occasion.